A very warm welcome to everyone. I welcome you to day one of our digital conference, GLF Africa, Restoring Africa's Drylands, Accelerating Action on the Ground. We have over 6,606 participants, mostly Pan-African, millions joining on social media. My name is Cinderella Ndlovu, and I'm joining in from Zimbabwe. I'm part of the Youth Landscape Initiative, and I participated in the just ended road trip restoration. We're excited to bring to you a diverse voices from Africa, the African continent and beyond to join a regional and global dialogue. Over the next 2 days, we aim to leverage evidence to build partnerships, spread innovative propositions, and to generate support to help make the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration a success, with a specific focus on restoring Africa's drylands. To join this important conversation, be sure to use the hashtag GLFAfrica on all your social media channels, and make sure to check out the full agenda on the Hover app on your desktop or smartphone to connect, share, learn, and act over the next 2 days. Use it to create your own personalized agenda across our plenaries, partner sessions, youth daily shows, virtual tours, and launchpads, as well as film festivals, networking sessions as well. You can also visit our digital exhibition booths and take part in or start a conversation thread on virtual meetups. English and French translations are available through the translation app interaction. Please find the link in the chat or below the live stream on each of their sessions. For further assistance, visit the FAQ where you will find more assistance there. In order to hear from you, the audience, during the sessions, we'll be using the poll function on the Hover app. You can find it located next to the Q&A box. And to get started, we want to hear your answers to the question. In one word, what does restoration mean to you? So that is the question that you need to answer using the Q&A box in the Hover app function. If you're tuning in via social media, please also post your questions and comments using the chat function on the event page. Now, let's get started with the opening plenary, where we will hear a uniquely African perspective on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which, as many of you know, is launching on the 4th of June in just 2 days' time. We want to use this opportunity to explore what the decade means for the African drylands and how the experience and the perspectives of those working to restore Africa's drylands can influence the decade. What a start to GLF Africa that aims to contribute to changing the narrative on drylands from a landscape full of problems to one brimming with opportunities. So with me today, I have my co-host, Tony Simons, the Executive Director for C4 ECRAF and Director General of ECRAF. Hey, Tony.
Hey, Cinderella, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
It's a great day here in Nairobi.
Awesome. It's also a great day here in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. I think it's really great that we are starting out the Global Landscape Forum event on ecosystems with an intergenerational dialogue. Don't you think so?
Yes, I mean, essentially it's putting people at the center of the conversation and people at the center of the conservation. And if my white hair was not enough of a clue, I'm representing the older generation. And as Cinderella said, my name is Tony Simons.
Speaking of the older generation, Tony, I'm a young person, I'm African, and with all due respect for the older generation, I feel like I have to say this. Generally, all encounters with the older generation speak of a time whereby there were the good old days, whereby everything back in the day seemed to be going their way. However, as a young person who has never experienced the so-called good old days, I'm failing to see a reflection of this wisdom and experience possessed by the older generation. And I feel like your generation, Tony, really messed up, and it has left the planet in such a mess, and it has shot it into pieces with its wisdom. So I'd like to find out from you, I only have one question. Why is that so? Why are we in this mess?
A tough question, Cinderella. Well, I guess it was a combination of arrogance, greed, ignorance, and denial. We thought we knew best. We could tame nature and extract all the value we wanted from nature at our will. We thought it was a free-for-all, when actually it was a cost for all. I mean, we've cut down more forest in the last 100 years than we. Older people are grateful for your respect, Cindy, but unless together we respect nature more, we're all going to be in trouble. And okay, even though we don't say it very often in Ndlovu, older people also respect youth. We respect your energy, we respect your new ideas, and we respect your sense of urgency.
But Tony, as we are holding a mirror up to ourselves and admitting some home truths, young people are not exactly blameless. We want instant results, and we want kind of get rich overnight options. We struggle with your patience, and we want change, and we want it tomorrow. So I want to find out, I really, as a young person, I feel like we have that sense of urgency and we want things to be fixed immediately.
Fair point, but Cinderella, we can't fix complex things like ecosystems overnight. And even in a decade, we'll not restore all of Africa's ecosystems. But it's a great time to start with UNEP, FAO, UNCCD, and other partners. Rome and the Egyptian pyramids were not built in a day. They were massive infrastructure projects that took decades, that took centuries to complete. Interestingly, the next big infrastructure projects for Africa are going to be green infrastructure, nature. We need to leverage that natural capital and the social capital of the youth. So throwing it back to you, Ndlovu, are the youth ready for that challenge? How are you going to make the difference?
I think the youth, we as the young people are definitely ready for that challenge, and we can make a difference by participating, not just waiting or asking for permission. We have to co-own our joint future with the older people. And we often speak of capacity building in Africa, but we have a huge capacity in our youth. What I feel we need to speak of is capacity mobilization. And with apologies to the older generation, your pledges alone are not going to be enough to mobilize the youth. Don't you think hope, options, equity, jobs, and being inclusive is what will mobilize the youth? We also need to modernize the concept of community and individualism. Yes, we still want community endorsement, but we also need to make more space in Africa for the individual to make a difference.
Wow, that's very profound, Cinderella. As in many parts of the world, it's individualism that has sparked much of that greed, ignorance, and denial that we spoke of earlier. We certainly need greater community engagement. And so maybe to liven it up a bit, to animate it, let's try a bit of role reversal, okay? So imagine for a moment that you are an older person. And so as an older person, what advice would you give to the youth?
I think what I would say is join forces. Join forces instead of blaming each other's weaknesses. The youth's energy and the sense of agency we were talking about, combined with the patience and the experience of the older generation, has so much and very great potential to accelerate the paradigm shift that we urgently need, not only as the African continent, but as a global society. Okay, Tony, so speaking of role reversal, imagine you were a 24-year-old and you have very few job prospects. You are living in a country with a very weak economy and you're struggling to make ends meet. You worry about the planet, but you feel a bit hopeless and the day-to-day issues dominate your decisions. What advice would you give to the gray-haired elders?
Okay, enough on the role reversal. Let's move on. No. Okay. I know you're not going to let me do that. Okay, well, I would think of 2 points in Deliveroo. Firstly, we have new challenges and we need new thinking and new plans. And we've got to involve the youth in these. As young people outnumber older people in Africa, 10 to 1. Yes, there's 10 young people for every elderly person. And I think secondly, to mentor youth to be those next leaders, not only for Africa, but for the entire world. And it's what the world needs is some youth leadership and mobilization, as you spoke of earlier.
That's really great advice. So, Dr. Simons, how then can we heed our own advice? How can we generate the change both our generations need?
Okay, how about inclusive planning?
And not just counting pledges, but making those pledges count.
And prioritizing finance and jobs for nature.
Definitely. And using the decade on ecosystem restoration to transform the intergenerational divide into an intergenerational bridge. So now, Dr. Simons, I think we are about to head on to our keynote speakers.
Great. So speaking of bridges, Cinderella, we're excited for all different perspectives that this plenary and the whole conference is going to give space to. So we've got 4 amazing keynote speeches now, and I'd like to introduce the first one, who is Ibrahim Tiao, who is the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. UNCCD has always kind of been a little bit of the poorer cousin to the other conventions, but with Ibrahim Tiao taking over the reins here, he's changing that. He's turning it into the land convention for everyone. This is somebody who has enormous experience and is one of the best qualified people to share his insights with us. Ibrahim Tiao, over to you for your intervention.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was an amazing conversation you just had, Tony, with Cinderella. And I would like to build on that just to see how we can take this conversation a little bit further. Now, to speak about land is to speak about life in all its complexity, whether wet, dry, or severely degraded. The land is humanity's common treasure that we must all protect. So allow me to have a discussion about 5 myths that we need to debunk about dry lands. First myth, dry lands are not productive lands. Is that true? No, I don't think so. Dry lands provide us with unique products and produces, cereals, animal feed, non-timber products. Almost 3 billion people live in drylands globally, including hundreds of millions of pastoralists. Half of the world rangelands are found in drylands, including the largest terrestrial mammals and the tourism economy they generate. The fashion industry would not survive without cotton coming from drylands. The world is just about to discover the nutritional and health values of fonio, shea butter, baobab, and other cosmetic products, including those that are really produced uniquely in drylands. Second myth, drylands are not rich in biodiversity and have little to offer to resolve the climate crisis. Again, that is untrue. From the largest terrestrial herbivores found in the magnificent savannas of Africa to the tiniest microorganism found in the large diversity of drylands habitats, savannas, ponds, oases, rivers, wetlands in drylands. The large open spaces of drylands are major carbon sinks. Their management and restoration provide unique mitigation as well as adaptation opportunities. Third myth, dryland do not contribute much to the economy. In most drylands, people have land as their only asset. In Africa, up to 70% of the population depend on the primary sector, including drylands that represent up to 45%. I saw 43 in the, it's the same. 43 or 45% of the landmass of Africa is covered by drylands. Agriculture, livestock, inland fisheries, tourism revenues. Think about the Okavango, the Masai Mara. Where is Kruger? Where is Zakuma in Chad? Where can you find the Waza in Cameroon? What about the Komwe in Cote d'Ivoire, to name just a few? Be it in Namibia, in Malawi, or in Mali, millions of people depend on drylands. Who can explain why the mighty rivers of the Nile, the Niger, the Zambezi, or the Senegal have to flow through arid lands? As you know, the vast Sahara Desert is sitting atop of the largest aquifers in Africa. Paradoxically, the drylands of Africa are granaries for hundreds of millions. Without its drylands, Africa would not be Africa. Africa is blessed with its drylands. Fourth, drylands are wastelands. They are not worth investing in. What a myth. Today, drylands harbor major extractive industries, from oil production in the Middle East to mineral extraction in dry Africa and Australia. The world is amazed by the clean energy potential found in drylands. Expect the shift from fossil fuel to hydrogen and other types of clean energy to be spearheaded in dry regions. Furthermore, with the progressive change of diets in the world, drylands are sources of healthy products on high demand. Expect the food industry to increase its investment in healthy food from the drylands. Drylands are major tourist destinations, thanks to the unique landscapes, spectacular wildlife, and great diversity of people. Again, major investments are needed in this sector. I promised you 25 myths. This is my last one. In drylands, people deliberately destroy their environment. That is, again, untrue. Drylands ecosystems are fragile, that's true. And they are more vulnerable to human activities and to human interactions with this type of habitat. However, people living in dry areas are generally water efficient and they use relatively little biomass. Either they scarcely use their environment, or they are forced to migrate because there would be no resources to sustain them. Today, take the example of the Sahel. 11 countries came together across the width of Africa, from Senegal, Mauritania to the west, to Djibouti and Eritrea to the east, with a giant ambition, with a bold vision, to invest substantial human and financial resources to heal their degraded ecosystems, support their rural communities, and contribute to climate change. They will, with their partners, build a new green world wonder, the Great Green Wall. Commitments will now have to move to a scalable action. Tony, change is homemade, not imported. It is time to change our narrative on dry lands, on Africa. It is time to reset. It is time to rethink Africa's development. It is time to turn challenges into opportunities. The African population is certainly young and dynamic. Cinderella is just one of these examples. The African youth population is not a dynamite. African drylands are certainly fragile. They are not volatile. When a lion jumps in the finish line of a race, those who were in the back certainly take the lead. This African wisdom is perhaps the closest equivalent I have found to the English concept of piggybacking. Thank you.
Wow, Ibrahim, thanks very much tremendously for those inspirational and insightful words. Cinderella, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. For now, allow me to introduce to you Miss Inga Anderson. She has over 30 years experience working in a range of issues, including agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, and she is the executive director of UNEP Environmental Pillar, and she has a range of leadership positions. Miss Inga Anderson, it is my pleasure. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I am very happy to speak to you all from beautiful Nairobi. And many thanks for that conversation that you and Tony had before. And to my brother Ibrahim, to Maria Flashbar, and of course to Vanjira. It's a pleasure to be on this panel together. Look, we've heard about what needs to change. We've heard about the intergenerational discussion. We've heard Ibrahim busting the 5 myths. So we understand, therefore, that the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which will kick off 2 days out, is coming at an absolutely critical moment. Youth are holding us to account. And we are in the middle of this triple planetary crisis. That's what we speak of at UNEP: the climate crisis, the biodiversity and nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. These 3 crises are driving us towards the very precipice. And unless we act, these waves of disruption, the waves of suffering will be brought, that we've seen by COVID, will be very little compared to what we will see here. And so this restoration decade that is now, we are formally launching, is a great opportunity to change the course, because we need to mobilize and make a social movement, a mass movement, a youth movement, a science movement, a finance movement, so that we can reverse that damage that we, humanity, have caused to the natural world and that our footprint is causing. It's a great opportunity to start delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals so that we can create that world of prosperity, of equality, and of peace. So to deliver on that commitment, we really need to move on ecosystem restoration. And of course here, as we've just heard from Ibrahim, drylands need to be high on the agenda. We've just heard from Ibrahim that these are critical ecosystems. They hold 1/3 of the world's biodiversity hotspots, not something people might know. They host half of the world's livestock, and they produce 44% of our crops. They are homes to 40% of the world's population, amongst them some of the world's most disadvantaged. And for the 268 million people here in Africa who rely on pastoralism for their livelihoods, healthy drylands are not an option, they are a must. So protecting and restoring these drylands, as well as other ecosystems, is a single solution that has these multiple wins. And restoring and protecting ecosystems, therefore, delivers on climate change because it'll help slow climate change. It will bring back biodiversity. It can produce productive jobs, and land can really enable families moving forward. It can help vulnerable communities adapt to climate change. And frankly, when we restore land, we build peace and we reduce forced migration. We buy time so that as we are decarbonizing our economies, we can move into circular models. So with such a strong case for action, commitment, we are seeing commitment growing for restoration. Now, 115 countries have put forward restoration targets covering 1 billion hectares. That's good. The Africa Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, Africa 100, is aiming to restore 100 million hectares by 2030. So these commitments are welcome. But as I say to everyone who signed up to Paris, signed up to Aichi targets, signed up to land degradation neutralities, promises don't put trees and grass in the ground. Promises don't build ecosystems. Action does. And to act with speed and purpose, we need to get the finance flowing. We need to get the incentives right. We need to get investments in nature-based solutions. And that needs to triple by 2030 and increase by 5 times by 2050 to meet our goals for climate, for biodiversity, and for land. Now, there are many ways to make the monies move and make that shift. We can adopt inclusive wealth models that value nature and prompt investment. We can legislate to change prevailing agricultural practices that favor to destroy ecosystems, negative practices such as forest clearing, and incentivize nature positive agriculture. We can allocate fund to restoration in the COVID-19 recovery. We can reform operations and financial flows of the business and financial sector so that they move towards restoring the natural world. We can embed ecosystem restoration targets in the national determined contributions, the promissory note that each nation is going to deliver to Glasgow, COP26. And we can enable that consumers know that they're buying deforestation-free products when they purchase wood, furniture, or food. Now, the UN system, as we heard from Ibrahim, is of course very committed to play our part. We at UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, will continue to support the African Landscape Restoration Initiative and the Great Green Wall for the Sahel and the Sahara Initiative, which is doing a good restoration work in complex settings in the Sahel. And at UNEP, we seek to work with countries to come up with transparent, predictable mechanism to translate all of these commitments into that action that I spoke about. I'm really pleased that the Global Landscapes Forum is having these discussions and that so many partners are involved, because it is only by working together that we will get stronger and we will find better ways to fund and implement restoration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Inga, for that beautiful, wonderful speech. I'll hand over to Tony to introduce our next keynote speaker.
Thanks very much, Cinderella. We're running a bit of behind time here, but that was fascinating from Inga as well. So our next speaker unfortunately couldn't join us in person today, but she did take the time to give us a recorded intervention. Her name is Dr. Maria Flashbar. She is the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. She's a passionate supporter of the Global Landscape Forum. She's a passionate supporter of development in Africa. And she is an unusual combination of a PhD in science and a policymaker and politician. So we really look forward to hearing Maria's opening remarks. Maria, can we cue the video, please?
Dear Mr. Simpson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to once again have the honor to speak at a conference of the Global Landscape Forum. This third Global Landscape Forum, Africa, comes at a good time. Not only are we half the way through a year in which the health of our planet, its biodiversity, and the interactions between humans, animals, and the environment are high on the global agenda. But we are also at the beginning of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. The international community has committed to responding to this challenge, launching a decade on restoration to counter decades of destruction and degradation of habitats. The German government is supporting this decade through a national campaign and numerous international projects. The start of the UN Decade on 5th of June will be the beginning of a global movement. We must use this window of opportunity to achieve the goals of the 2030 Agenda and observe the natural basis of survival for future generations in ecological, economic, and social terms. It is all too obvious. We need a way of thinking and swift action worldwide, a transformation moving away from systems that harm the environment and society towards sustainable systems. That concerns us all, both in the global north and the global south, even if in different ways. In Germany's development policy, we are firmly determined to move this transformation forward. We are convinced that a world without hunger is possible within planetary boundaries. The topic of restoring Africa's dry lands, accelerating action on the ground is highly relevant for more than 500 million people. Africa's vast savannas, grasslands, and bushlands are some of the most beautiful regions of the world. They are home to amazing natural landscapes with a unique fauna and flora, a great diversity of cultural landscapes with their own specific forms of settlement, farming, animal breeding, and artisan traditions, and last not least, a rich arts landscape and a culture that goes back thousands of years. We have come together today to conserve or restore these natural and cultural landscapes and develop them further so as to ensure they are attractive places for the people living there. Let me highlight a few points that I consider especially important. We are all called upon to take action at once, accelerating action on the ground, as the title of this event puts it. We must redefine business as usual and progress. This may vary from one context to another, yet one thing applies in every case. Holistic rural development strategies such as territorial ecology and nature-based approaches need to play a greater role. What this means is taking a multi-sectoral, integrated approach to spaces, developing good interaction between communities, business, and nature at a regional level, and in particular, building on local knowledge and traditions. Other important issues alongside comprehensive regional planning are, in particular, with regard to Africa drylands, increasing regional economic activity, production and productivity, for instance, through agroecological measures or ecological intensification. B, rehabilitation and conservation of resources, for instance, soils, forest, and bushlands. C, adapting measures to climate change, using, for instance, diversification and resilient species. D, fair access to land. E, and especially when it comes to the topic of this conference, wherever animal husbandry and grazing come into play, One Health must be an issue, One Health of human, of animal, and environment. Africa has a chance to learn from the mistakes many other regions of the world have made. Africa can go for modern, sustainable models and methods as it moves its economy and society forward. Such an approach to modern development through conservation and/or creation of functioning regional economical, social, and ecological systems is a key to better resilience against crisis and conflicts, especially in times of crisis, which we will always have to deal with. Rebuild better. In closing, I would like to thank the organizers not only for preparing this conference, but I would also like to congratulate them on the extremely diverse and varied program. The comprehensive approach seems to have been perfectly brought to life here, with a broad range of seminars and discussions, a virtual dryland tour, and musical interludes, and topped off with a film festival. The stage has thus been set for ideas and inspiration, success and enjoyment. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It is my pleasure again to introduce Wanjira Matai, whom I personally believe is the epitome of intergenerational continuity. She's an inspirational leader with over 20 years experience advocating for social and environmental change, both at a local and international level. She is the current Vice President and Regional Director for WRI, Development and Social Ecology Pillar. Wanjira was also named one of the 100 most influential women in Africa between 2018 and 2020. And she has a vast experience in a range of issues, including climate change, youth leadership, sustainable energy, and land restoration, amongst other things. We welcome you, Wanjira. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Cinderella, thank you very much for that introduction. Inga, Maria, and Ibrahim, thank you for your wonderful reflections. Delighted to be here to share a few thoughts as well as we open GLF Africa, focused on restoring Africa's drylands. This session in particular on the African perspective is absolutely crucial. It's crucial because while we are in the same boat with the rest of the world with respect to a number of crises, climate, COVID, and others, we are definitely not in the same boat. We must therefore ensure that our response, Africa's response, is urgent, it's firm, and it's appropriate for all. Now, during this consequential UN decade on ecosystem restoration, we have to double and even triple our efforts to prevent, halt, and reverse degradation of our most precious ecosystems. As Africans, we know just how much natural ecosystems have cushioned us over the years, providing food, water, and even energy security. My mother always told me so often about how, while growing up in the central highlands of Kenya in the lush landscapes of Ihithe in Nyeri, she fetched fresh drinking water from a nearby stream for her family. They enjoyed delicious tubers, bananas, sugarcane, and vegetables, which nourished their family reliably for years. This is not necessarily the case today, and that has to be a source of concern for all of us. And I know it is, and that's why we are here. Now, from Niger to Botswana, Africa's drylands are under attack. Every speaker has made it clear that I loved Ibrahim's Mythbusters. The degradation of all kinds of ecosystems, from mangroves to humid tropical forests, is simply alarming. When ecosystems are harmed, economies, biodiversity, and the climate suffers. But Africa's drylands, 2/3 of the continent, are especially important for the 300 and even 500 million people we will have by 2050. I want to use some of my time to bring attention to some of the champions of this continent, those thousands of organizations and millions of individuals, from entrepreneurs in Ethiopia, government officials in Niger, youth activists in Ghana, that have banded together to support this ecosystem restoration decade. They're building climate resilient and prosperous communities across the continent. And many of them are actually attending the conference, and I want to acknowledge them and thank them for their amazing work. We're building on work from the past decade, mobilizing inclusive partnerships like AFR 100, where country governments have actually pledged to restore an area of the land of the size of the land of Egypt, and then the Great Green Wall. And they're turning all of this into action on the ground. As you said, Inga, action is what counts. They are living proof of the fact that $1 invested in restoration of degraded landscapes can actually yield $7 to $30 in economic return. But who are these leaders? And over in Burkina Faso, we have, I want to share a few of those leaders with you. One, Burkina Faso, a young, famous local farmer, Yakuba Sawadoku. He created a new technique called Zai, where farmers actually plant crops and trees in shallow ditches, and then it catches the moisture and helps it grow. And not everybody believed him, not at all. But it has now been adopted by thousands of farmers across the Sahel, where it's boosting crop yields and regreening arid landscapes. Ladies and gentlemen, Yakuba is called the man who stopped the desert for a very good reason. And then there's Mamadou Lamine Abdul Kadir. He's an entrepreneur from Niger whose business E3D helped hundreds of farmers grow thousands of neem trees. They produce a natural pesticide, and Kadir buys these leaves from his clients, processes them into soaps and sprays, and they ward off, of course, mosquitoes and pests. And we know how good neem is for our own health. Because neem leaves are constantly renewing themselves, he's providing a supplementary source of income to these thousands of farmers he's working with. And fortunately for us, GLF will be hearing from him tomorrow. There's also in Ghana, Sadiq Ibn Abdullahi, and he's helping thousands of women grow some of my favorite trees, cashew trees, keeping bees under their canopies as well. How amazing is that? And he then buys the cashews and honey, packages and sells them to the market. The more he sells, the more trees and bees the local people can maintain. And then in the dry north of his home country, where the drought and desertification are keenly felt, that extra income is extremely meaningful. So ladies and gentlemen, what do these young champions actually need to scale their work? One, they need to have access to information so they can learn from what has made past restoration projects succeed or not. Second, they need stronger public incentives and government policies. God knows this is one of the biggest bottlenecks that provide technical expertise and pays them for ecosystem services like water that they are protecting. And third, our entrepreneurs absolutely need access to more finance so that they can scale this work. It is available, and just this year we saw donors pledge more than 14 billion to support the Great Green Wall. Now, to tap into this finance, the capacity and project developers need to mobilize the capacity. Cinderella, you mentioned what we do not, we have capacity, we need to mobilize it. We need to mobilize training, mentorship, and networks so our entrepreneurs and young people are ready for the markets. And surely, for Africa, if the Continental Free Trade Agreement that came into force in January cannot be activated to work for champions such as these, what good is it? I, like Inga and Ibrahim before me, would be remiss if I didn't mention on this platform, on Africa, young people. The role that young people play is pretty much the biggest comparative advantage Africa has. How do we interest them, activate them, and invest in them and their ideas? The Sahel, for example, is the youngest part of the world's youngest continent. That ought to be a source of great strength and inspiration. We have quite simply not done enough. And I hope we can focus our attention on the granular details of what is needed to transform Africa. And we will invest real resources in unlocking the true power of our youth. In closing, let me share some words of inspiration from one of Africa's leading restoration champions, my late mother, the late Professor Wangari Maathai. She often spoke about how important it is to empower Africans. She said that for Africa to benefit from the opportunities which come her way, she must empower her people. Education will help. Peace and security are crucial, and sustainable management of the resources essential. But people must be allowed to gain the confidence, the dignity, and a sense of self-worth. Ultimately, they must be empowered with the skills, knowledge, and tools to take action themselves. So let's take on that challenge today as we together embark on this most important decade on ecosystem restoration. Thank you, Cinderella and Tony.
Thank you so much, Wanjira, and all our opening speakers for the wonderful presentations and the speeches. I think they were really inspirational, highlighting all the important things that we need as a continent. For now, Tony, I think we will hand over to Siham for the next segment.
Well, thank you very much, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Welcome again to the GLF Africa. It is such an honor to open such an important gathering of technical experts, policymakers, civil society, entrepreneurs. What an exciting crowd. My name is Siham Drissi from the UNEP Ecosystem Division, and my work focuses on resilient agriculture and food security. Let me introduce you to our panel today. So Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Dr. Agnes Kalibata is president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, an institution she has led since 2014. AGRA works with other partners to promote inclusive agricultural transformation and sustainable development in Africa. Dr. Kalibata was recently appointed by the UN Secretary General as the Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. As you know, the summit aims to serve as a catalytic process within the decade of action to galvanize global efforts towards improving food systems around the world to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. We also have the honor of having John Kamanga, who is the director of the South Rift Association of Landowners, SORALO, and in his capacity, his mandate is to work with pastoral communities to promote biodiversity conservation through the promotion of open and interconnected ecosystems, the iconic Maasai culture, which is the basis for sustained wild spaces and tourism in the region between the Masai Mara and Amboseli, in order to enhance livelihoods and better management of natural resources. And last but not least, we will have Nditi Nkonkwo Nuneli, who is the co-founder and managing partners of Sahel Consulting Agriculture and Nutrition, which works across West Africa, shaping policy, creating catalytic ventures, and implementing ecosystem solutions. She is also the co-founder of AACE Foods, which produces a range of spices, seasonings, and cereal for local and international markets, and the founder of Live Africa. Thank you so much, Agnes, John, and Didi, for joining us today. My first question will go to Dr. Kalibata. Landscape and ecosystem degradation have an impact on food systems and food security. In your experience, how can small-scale farmers and local communities be involved, recognized, and supported in restoration agenda and strategies. Over to you, Dr. Kalibata.
Thank you for those introductory remarks, and really appreciate all the comments and conversations that have happened before now to set the stage for us. To go back to the very question you've asked, maybe just it's important to recall what is happening here. What we see from an agricultural perspective, you find that there are 3 or 4 drivers, I might say, that are really leading to the ecosystem degradation we are seeing, and so has implications on how restoration happens. The biggest driver to date that we know from an agricultural perspective is, of course, tillage, where farmers that have minimum access to inputs are looking for production, certain volumes that they must get from the land. And we know that until now, 30% of that volume is coming from increased land use, meaning farmers increasingly use more virgin land to be able to produce. So that continues to be a challenge. Then overgrazing, where of course, as the carrying capacity of ecosystems reduce, then the overgrazing becomes the thing that becomes the biggest driver. There's also poor access to alternative livelihoods. Most of these people are living in places where ability to access other forms of livelihood becomes extremely challenging. And of course, then there's the agroecological challenge, in the sense that most of the erosion, for example, if you look at my own country, Rwanda, is driven by the nature of the ecosystem in which agricultural systems are happening. So all this is becoming detrimental to biodiversity loss. You know that agricultural systems are driving 80% biodiversity loss, leading to further climate change, leading to further yield loss, and even in many cases leading to malnutrition. The fact that Africa's soils are some of the oldest, but also some of the most depleted, means like things like zinc, calcium, and iron are increasingly becoming less available from the plants we grow and the plants we eat perspective, and have to be supplemented from either biofortification or other sources. So really, sometimes all this even leads to conflicts, especially in pastoral ecosystems, as many of you have mentioned before. So many of these are definitely related to the type of restoration that we would be seeing, and the engagement around restoration. So I'm going to talk about restoration from a people perspective, community perspective, country perspective, and partnerships perspective. From a people perspective, it's really important to recognize that the people that love land the most, the people that care about what land gives them the most, are the people that are using them. Farmers, smallholder farmers, agro-pastoralists, and others that really see this as the asset that they use. The only reason that they degrade it, the main reason that they degrade these pieces of land, is limited access to other means of production, number one. Number two, lack of access to the lands themselves. So really, the investment in the land is not worth their time. So we have to think about what type of land rights do people have, and what's the incentive for them to invest in these lands. And then when you move it to community level, the kind of landscape planning that happens that ensures that as communities move, as you move from people to people and you move to community, that you have appropriate level land planning that allows for restoration to really be landscape level restoration. So this can't happen unless we have countries that have commitments to driving this level of engagement in terms of policies that ensure the right people engagement and the right incentives, but also in terms of policies that ensure community level engagement. And there are very good examples on the ground. I mean, we have a program here with the government of Kenya and UNEP and GEF, where we've worked with communities around the Kakamega area, and these communities are restoring the land. All they needed was someone to be able to help them have appropriate yields from the land they are working. Remember, it costs so much energy and labor to do more land. If farmers can get more in less, they definitely will do more with less. So what we are helping them do is have access to improved varieties that will ensure that they get more and less. And this is an age-old technology. People are already doing these things in so many places. So for some of these African farmers definitely living in these ecosystems, because forests are fresh and they have ability to generate more, they will cut that land before they go spending money on something else that can increase yields. But here we are giving them the ability to understand the balance between the forest and production of increasing yields. And we can see that from an ecosystem, an ecosystem perspective supported by, excuse me, by the local government. There's actually a very good interest in ensuring that they plant more forests. They've grown their land under forest by 6,000 hectares, and they're producing so much more food with less land. So it's not that examples don't exist, but one thing we have to think about is the long-term investment needs. It takes a whole lot of time and energy to get landscape level restoration, and the incentives for farmers, the benefits come so much late in time. That's the reason I go back to some of the things that I've mentioned earlier. We must invest in incentives and share the rehabilitation costs so that communities that are being engaged in these things have the incentive to be able to do so, but also don't carry this as a burden. I would like to reassure you that what I have seen from a food systems perspective, many people are engaged and many people want to ensure that their lands are productive, but they don't have the means, they don't have the incentive. And this is where policies again come in, and partnerships. So as we go into this, ensuring that we are investing in people, providing capital investments, investing in institutions, so that the people that use the land have the ability and the means to be able to protect the land, is one of the things that will ensure appropriate restoration. We are doing this in some of the drylands in Kenya, and we are seeing farmers that have never produced good yields, have good yields for the first time because they have access to better varieties, but also they have access to better agronomy and management, soil management practices that encourage them to do better. We are doing some of this work with IKEA in some of Kenya's drylands. So we have so many examples in our midst. We've seen huge land restoration programs taking place with farmers in Rwanda. We've seen huge land restoration programs taking place with farmers in Ethiopia. And we know that these things are possible. So as long as we build partnerships that can support communities do this, as long as we advance policies that can support communities do this, these are things that we can do. And there's enough momentum on the ground for us to be able to move this forward. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be part of this meeting. And thank you for advancing this conversation, which, if we do the right thing, then Africa should be able to do more than the 100 million hectares we have pledged that we would do by 2030, because it doesn't come anywhere near enough, but it would be good, because globally we have a continent the size of South America that needs to be rehabilitated, and we have a whole lot of work to do. So I look forward to these efforts, especially as we link them to what is happening in the Food Systems Summit. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalibata, for your time and for your insights. Really much appreciated. Let me, for the sake of time, address a question to John about, like, based also on what Dr. Kalibata said, and based on your experience, how did landscape degradation and land use changes actually have an impact on the pastoralist communities, and how did they manage to adapt, you know, with Soralo? Over to you, John. Thank you so much. You're on mute, John.
Thank you very much, Siam, and the speakers before me. And thank you, Agnes, for highlighting a few things from an agricultural perspective in drylands. From a pastoral perspective, I think communities over time have adapted to survive and make a good living out of our drylands, and particularly from a pastoral perspective where mobility was key, so that they can use different parts of the ecosystem and landscape when they were distressed. However, things are changing very fast, and today, because of the pressures that we have, because of the new finds, the drylands today have been found to be productive areas again. Because of the pressures, we bring a lot of pressure to our highlands, population growth, and now everybody is running away, whether that is governments looking for minerals and extractives, or whether that is people because of the overpopulation in our high productive areas, also looking for space out there. Our rangelands and our drylands are under a lot of pressure. And of course, the pressures are also changing the form in which land is being used. And with the change of land use, what is happening today in our drylands is that traditionally nature did its work because we had vast space and we were moving about in that space. Nature was able to breathe. Nature was able to actually get itself back to what it needed to do. But today we don't. The cycle is too fast. We have other pressures beyond ourselves as people, climate change and all these that we have created through industrialization. And therefore we need to up our game. And in upping our game, again, part of the changes that are coming in, what was common in a lot of the pastoral areas was sharing, this culture of sharing of space, of resources. But today we're having a lot of pressure in individualization. People are getting to start to say mine. And the more you say mine, the more you close out your other friends, the more you close out, other players in nature, wildlife and everything that needs to use expansive spaces. So how do we turn that around? And we are trying as an organization to again try to bring back these communities to be able to dialogue amongst themselves, to be able to ensure that space is open so that we are not fencing and everybody creating their own little island, so that then we can be able to benefit from spaces that otherwise will be closed to us. And as I said, other nature users like wildlife. And in doing that, of course, today we also have the advantage of technology, that we're able to anticipate when a drought is going to come and share that with the community so that then appropriate action can be taken. But also intensification of planning so that then we can zone land, we can be able to, save pasture for a bad time. But also then looking at diversifying so that then communities are able to make a living in things that are not necessarily destructive to their already very fragile environment, so that people can make a living. Because if they don't make a living in ways that are not destructive, then they go for the low-hanging fruits for them, and that would be cut down the trees and because of energy. We also in a distressed place because we live very close to Nairobi. Nairobi has a lot of poor population whose source of energy could be charcoal, and therefore people move out there to cut down our rangelands to bring back charcoal as energy to use. So how do we give them alternatives, and so that we are able to save the rangelands for our use today, but also for the future. And so, and as part of that, we also try to bring the youth, because in terms of planning and use, with the changes that are coming in, our youth today also are interested a lot in resources, in money, because I need to have a computer, I need to have a smartphone, I need to have a lot of things that money has to bring. But if we cannot be able then to diversify and offer them opportunities, then they could be the same people who come to be destructive, because as they look for the quick monies. We also have to be careful in part of what we are doing, so that as we talk about restoring our rangelands, we are also not bringing practices that finally will annihilate the pastoralists from their own land. So we're making sure that we are careful to maintain that balance, so that land rights have to be addressed, so that then the practitioners can continue to feel that they are in their space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for this insight. Indeed, we heard about the importance of investments. We heard about the importance of incentives. What is the private sector doing for the restoration agenda? What are some good examples in Africa? And how can we involve more and better the private sector and make restoration economically viable for local communities? Over to you, Ndidi.
Thank you so much, and congratulations to all the other speakers for your wonderful insights. So I wear a couple of hats, and I'll share private sector interventions from these three hats. The first is, as the managing partner of Sahel Consulting, we are implementing the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria project, which builds a lot on what John has said. And this is a private sector driven approach to engage processors who source milk. Historically, many of these processors imported milk powder from across Europe, and now they're actually sourcing milk locally by investing in supporting rural communities and pastoralists, teaching them how to milk hygienically, providing a whole feed and fodder industry, ensuring that we have solar-powered boreholes, and ensuring that we train these communities through self-help groups and cooperatives to collaborate to ensure that not only are they providing milk, but they're also improving their livelihoods and respecting and restoring the environment. And this is in northern Nigeria, which is in the Sahelian region. And so through this Aldine project funded by the Gates Foundation, we're proving that it makes business sense to source locally, it makes business sense to invest in communities and to respect and restore the environment. And we're working with 6 local dairy processors and expanding to many more. Yesterday was World Milk Day. We had a huge conference celebrating the learnings that we've gained from this and also scaling some of these interventions to enable more dairy companies source locally in a respectful way that restores the environment. So that's Aldine. Another is through our sister company, Sahel Capital, and it manages the Fund for Financing Agriculture in Nigeria. And I sit on the Technical Advisory Committee for Sahel. And what we've seen is the power of finance. And a few people have spoken about this, but not just finance for finance sake, but finance that prioritizes ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, that every investment looks at the ESG lens and prioritizes the environmental commitment these companies make. So before Sahel Capital invests money between $3 to $5 million in SMEs in Nigeria that are working in the ag and food space, they do an ESG assessment. And most of these SMEs cannot afford to put in place some of these ESG requirements. And so we come in with technical assistance to support them to prioritize environmental protection, restoration, and to ensure that they do well and do good and do no harm. And we're seeing the power of ESG. And this is one key takeaway, that every investor working in Africa has to prioritize ESG, and where possible, provide technical assistance to support SMEs to ensure that they prioritize their environmental engagement with the community, and they put restoration at the heart of every investment in the agriculture and food landscape. And then the final hat is Nourishing Africa. And some of you might know Nourishing Africa. It's a hub that we launched last year that is envisaged as a hub for 1 million entrepreneurs across the food and agriculture landscape in Africa. And we support entrepreneurs in 34 African countries. And we're teaching these entrepreneurs the importance of scaling, but scaling with green as their mindset. And this is so key, as Agnes talked about. It's so important that we actually not only equip these entrepreneurs and train them, but also ensure that with every attempt at scaling in the agriculture and food landscape, they respect the environment, they restore the environment, and they not only do well, but do good, make money doing well. And I think this is critical. We have to infuse this into every agribusiness curriculum. We have to infuse this into our schools. We have to infuse this into our business development services and equip our entrepreneurs as they scale to ensure that we don't repeat the mistakes from the West, and that we build companies that are not only sustainable, but resilient and adaptive to climate change. And so through these hats, I've seen the power of private sector in Africa, informed private sector, equipped private sector to serve as change agents. And I look forward to working with all of you to be catalytic in our sector and to raise the next generation of entrepreneurs who will not only do well and do good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Didi. This is so exciting, and this is just like opening the doors for more conversations and future partnerships. I have unfortunately we have to end this session. A few key messages quickly before I invite you to join the next one. What we saw is the importance to recognize how nature loss disproportionately impacts the livelihoods of people living in poverty and vulnerable situations, and can perpetuate the patterns of exclusion and discrimination. That it is important, to understand the complex interaction between, human rights, biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, and human health, including the value of nature-based solutions through the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of natural resources. The input from colleagues show how biodiversity and ecosystem services, whose value is often not properly understood and accounted for, are fundamental for the full enjoyment of a wide array of human rights, including the right to life, health, food, water, and culture. Finally, the discussions highlighted the importance of connecting multiple stakeholders to strengthen national and regional policies that deliver for all, and the importance of ensuring meaningful participations from the private sector, from the public institutions, youth, indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making processes and planning, but also the importance of supporting investments in line with the restoration agenda and encourage and create opportunities for communities to access incentives. Along the same lines, let us stress the importance of more gender-responsive and youth-focused approaches to safeguard, the nature and human rights. In line with the traditional African philosophy, Ubuntu, and to quote the human rights activist and Nobel Prize laureate Desmond Tutu, "My humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. We shall overcome together by preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of ecosystems worldwide." Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the GLF Africa.